Welcome to WeCan, Sonya Weigle. I am excited you're here to share your story and your lessons learned. You are the founder and CEO of NextStageBio Advisors, a consultancy for the biotech and life sciences industries, helping companies navigate transitions and growth. You're helping scientists or biotech entrepreneurs turn their lab breakthroughs into successful marketed medical products. You are also a pioneer of fractional C-suite leadership, and we'll talk about that more. And you're an expert in bench to market commercialization in those industries. You know a lot about corporate leadership, about strategic advisory for founders, mentorship, and advocacy. Sonya, so talk to us exactly about what you do.
Well, first of all, Stephanie, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to have this conversation with you today. And, what I really sort of pride myself on doing is helping tremendous scientists become extraordinary leaders and, helping them to navigate that transformation, which is often happens from the lab into a place of C-suite or founder level leadership. And often what makes people super successful in the lab is not necessarily the same sets of skills or behaviors or competencies that would make you a successful founder or CEO, C-suite leader. And so really helping to navigate that bridge while at the same time helping to create around you the bench of leadership and employees that are going to help your company go from the stage where it is to the next stage is also part of it.
Yeah. So talk to us about those pivotal points, Sonya, that got you to where you are today.
Well, so my career has been circuitous at best, with lots of pivots and turns, all really aligned around whatever the needs were of my family at the moment. And, the big pivots in my career really came mostly with the birth of each of my three children, with each, that's just a phase that working mothers sort of that's the reality that we face, right? And each time can be a little bit different, and it's about leaning and pivoting into the combination of what your personal needs are and then what your professional needs are, and sort of identifying what's best for you in that moment. And so, my career started in global consulting right out of graduate school, and with that comes long hours and 5 days a week of travel, and which I loved, by the way. And I loved consulting. I loved the space. That go hard, work hard, that environment where you're just surrounded by extraordinarily smart people and you've got really interesting work to do. And I love that. And then my first baby was born, and I was like, oh, I can never leave this child. I can never get on a plane again. How is this going to work? So that opened up the opportunity, or I sort of sought out the opportunity to go into corporate at that point. So I didn't have to travel anymore. And then with the birth of my second baby, now I have one calling the nanny mommy, and I've got one on the way, and that didn't feel right either. So at that point, I pivoted into entrepreneurship. And I figured, there's got to be a way to do the work that I love, but still be able to raise my family. And along the way, had my third, started a couple of businesses, sold a couple of businesses, and I've been sort of steadily on redefining my personal definition of entrepreneurship in a way that as my kids, grew and their needs changed through teenagehood, and now my youngest is a senior in college, I found myself pivoting again because I've now got this empty nested situation going on. And, I've got 30 years, almost 30 years of marriage, in the bag here. I've got kids who have grown and flown and are chasing their own dreams in the most extraordinary ways. And so now it's my turn. It's my time finally. And I get to kind of define, okay, so what does this stage of life look like? And for me, as you've mentioned, it's some combination of what I've done before in terms of consulting and entrepreneurship, but I'm doing it in a more portfolio way, where I've launched a couple of businesses and taking on multiple clients. And, I really have the space and the time now to kind of expand and grow. And so I'm growing my consultancy in a different way because I don't have the limitations that I had when I had little kids at home. So now I'm back to travel, which I love. And I've aligned my business, and biotech industry actually beautifully aligns where its epicenters, location wise, are actually aligned with where my kids live in California and in New York.
Mm.
So I can be very purposeful about where I pick up my clients. I've got one son in San Francisco and I've got clients there. I've got a daughter in LA. I've got clients there. I've got a daughter in New York. I've got clients there. And so it's all working out quite beautifully.
Yeah, amazing, Sonya. I love listening to you as you pave your way forward, sort of adjusting to the different life phases that we live as women. And I think the other thing that I hear you say is that no one ever tells us that we have potentially decades of time post children that we can rededicate to something that we really believe in, that we therefore, and we redesign our life and we go all in again in a way that suits us. And I think no one ever told me that. And I'm in the same position, 30 years married, 3 kids out of the house practically. And so, and all of a sudden you think, wow, okay, I have 20, 30 years to dedicate to this thing that I believe in. Sonya, so talk to us a little bit what you feel the future of biotech and life sciences will look like in the next 10 years.
I'm happy to report that I think biotech as an industry is evolving from what we call the biotech winter,
Hmm.
where, from COVID and on, it just sort of slowed down and stagnated in terms of just access to capital. The exits weren't happening. And so, as an industry, we've really taken a beating. And a lot of the work that I'm doing is helping women sort of take back their power in the uncertainty of the industry by saying, okay, look, how do I want to redirect my career in a space that's been really sort of uncertain? But it's kind of coming together now, and we're seeing big deals happen, and we're seeing um, investment happen again now in early stage biotech, and that's really really exciting. And as an advisor to early stage biotech companies that are scaling and creating hiring plans to align now with this new opportunity, they've got the funding to do this. I'm also seeing now that sort of old school pre-2021, pre-COVID war for talent heating back up again. Whereas before there were a lot of people on the bench because there were a lot of layoffs happening, a lot of biotech closings and things. Things are opening up again, and I'm finding, for extraordinary candidates that have, really specialized skill sets, which is very typical in biotech, they're now looking at multiple opportunities. They're now having multiple conversations. And so, it's really making for, it's a lot of fun and there's a lot of energy behind it. And, with biotech really being the innovation piece of pharma,
Yeah.
what's really exciting is that patients are now seeing movement on the development of drugs for untreated diseases and things like that.
It's hugely exciting. Sonya, so what would your advice be for biotech or life science entrepreneurs that are, at that early stage now, where they know they're sitting on something really
Mhm.
powerful potentially?
My advice would be surround yourself with the right people, the right talent that can help you package this opportunity in a way that's going to attract and secure those seed round Series A level of investment, and then really think about the end in mind as you build out. Oftentimes the focus is so much on the science, obviously as it should be, that we put on the back burner the idea of finding the right people to help you execute. And by the time you get to that mind space to say, oh my gosh, I need the right clinical team, I need the right commercial team, then it's often too late to ensure that you can find the right talent. A lot of these positions can take a long time to find.
Yeah.
And so, that's often not on the forefront of thinking in terms of scaling the organization. You're thinking of space, you're thinking of outsourced clinical operations, you're thinking of, those kinds of things. But you also, as you scale the organization, need to align your hiring plan with
Hmm.
clinical and financial milestones. the last thing you want to do is bring in too many people too soon, or you're now moving so quickly because you've waited so long, you're bringing in the wrong people,
Mm.
which causes problems. Or, in terms of your relationship with your investors, you're not aligning it with their financial milestones. And so, that relationship or that confidence that needs to come with the capital can often be compromised because you're not aligned with who you're bringing in and when and how you're doing it.
Sonia, and you help people with all of those steps,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about, this fractional C-suite leadership where you essentially step into the roles of a CEO to help them transition to the next phase where you have a product that can be marketed, B, you have the investment in place to then find the right people to take over from you.
Yeah, so I usually step in as the chief people officer or chief
Right.
strategy officer, working with the CEO
Mm-hmm.
and the board and the investors to develop the hiring plan that can execute on the strategy that they've developed. And I'll bring a team with me who will also operate on a fractional basis. So, the talent acquisition team is an example. So, everyone on my team, we're 25 years plus more experience, and we'll build out the HR operation. We'll make sure that you're compliant, that when you are securing people, that they're coming into an organization that has the organization structure and the culture to not only attract top talent, but to retain them. That we have a clear leadership plan and development plan for those folks as they come in. So it's really sort of a 90-day sprint to create the infrastructure, so that as we scale quickly, we're not crushed under the weight of our own success.
Mm.
And that the employee life cycle is certain, it's automated, we have the right systems in place so that even at the point of candidacy, this top talent has a sense for who the organization is that they're coming into, that we have an alignment around culture and values and other things so that they can come in and operate at their highest and best use, and that everybody is equipped to scale quickly.
Sonia, what do you feel is sort of the important thing in terms of company culture for all these, relatively young people coming into all these startups? What is important for them?
So what I often find, and I'll do an assessment, even if it's a very small organization, the first thing I'll do is ask the existing team, regardless of how quickly we scale and how big we get, what are the components of your current culture that are non-negotiable? They have to
Mm.
stay. And oftentimes I'll hear things like, well, I love the way that we collaborate now. We're a small team. We all come together and we answer the tough questions together. We address the tough problems together as a team. Or, I love the way that we communicate. I have a relationship with the CEO because, there are no layers here. And, we understand where the company is going. We have a clear direction or vision of the strategy because we talk to the CEO every day.
Mm.
So, those are the kinds of things that are fundamental and foundational as a culture, but it's also something that will evolve and change as the company grows. So whereas communication and collaboration will continue to be important, it's important to understand that the bigger you get, you're not going to have daily access to the CEO.
Mm.
As you move from startup through successful phases to perhaps IPO, there's going to be levels of communication and information that can't be shared. Whereas we're all doing everything together, we need to be able to create work streams without silos. And so being able to do that is a critical component without losing the critical cultural components that are important for a growing startup, that communication, that collaboration, the patient focus, and the idea of what we're doing is for the patient. And putting that sort of as at the foundation as well, and just really valuing innovation and speed, but not at the cost of
Mm.
quality and compliance.
Amazing. So what does success look like for you?
Oh, I feel so great about what I've been able to curate for myself in this stage of my life and my career. I have a lot of control over my calendar, despite the fact that I work a lot of hours.
Yeah.
I've been able to carve out slow mornings for myself. So whereas before when I was, in corporate and it was, going immediately as soon as I get up, I'm on the phone, I'm able to preserve parts of the day for myself. Success for me is scaling this consultancy so that I've got, enough clients, but also preserving my non-negotiables in terms of my self-care and my self-focus. I feel like that's what I've earned at this point in my life and at this point of my career. So success for me means, having the freedom to grow my business and create opportunity for my team. And, I'm not a scientist, right? So I'm not the one developing these novel treatments and all of those exciting things, but I do have the honor and the privilege of being part of the approach to equip the folks that do that and allow them and enable them to operate in their highest and best use, to create organizations and cultures and structures that really, allow for all of that innovation and employee engagement. But, I'm able to do all of that, but I'm still able to preserve space for me and for the things that are important for me, for travel to see my children, for, time with my husband, those kinds of things. That's what's really great about this stage of my life and career. So I think success looks like more of that.
Definitely. What advice do you have for university leavers, Sonya, that are thinking about those industries, they're interested in those industries?
So I think for young entrants into this space, obviously a focus on the sciences and everything would have been your focus in school. But if the idea of being part of a startup and being part of an innovative um, and collaborative company in the biotech space, it doesn't necessarily require you to be the scientist. I think it requires um, a lot of compassion and passion around the idea of early stage drug development and bringing novel solutions to untreated conditions. But there's also a willingness to really do your part, to come in and be willing to learn and to be receptive to different working environments, different working styles. I think, I have kids in that space. Like, my youngest is a senior in college. And, I think I advise her, as I did my other kids and the other kids, to really focus on what brings you passion and what brings you joy and create opportunities around that. What's unique about kids that are coming out of college now versus when I came out is, technology enables us to have more choice than ever and more control over how we do things than ever. So really lean into what comes so naturally to you at this generation. Lean into that technology and allow it to enable you to open up opportunities that perhaps you hadn't considered. Because if you're working in a space that brings you joy, it's not going to feel like work at all. And you're really going to be willing and interested in putting in the time to be successful.
Definitely. Sonya, so what kind of a leader are you? What is the sort of vibe that you give out to those teams that you come into?
I feel like my leadership superpower is the ability to see things in my team members that they don't see in themselves, and then sort of pushing them outside of their comfort zone to capture those things. I have a woman that's worked for me for, maybe 5 years, and she's an extraordinary talent acquisition leader. But what she didn't see in herself is that she's an extraordinary speaker,
Mm.
and she comes to it with sort of a fear of public speaking, and I think a lot of people have that. But her voice and her approach and her experience is so valuable, and her willingness to give it is so beautiful. And combining those two things in a way that she can present and give that to the world. And it doesn't even have to be around business, but she's a speaker and a
Mm.
teacher at heart. And putting her in a position to have to do that, frankly, I think scared her to death. But she ended up going to get a coaching certification
Amazing. Yeah.
and is using that. And that's just taken her skill set. And despite all the years of experience, she's now even better at it. And it's just a wonderful thing to see. So I really like to kind of drill into, what's the hidden superpower that you don't know that you have? And how can I use my level of influence to open up a space for you to kind of lean into that?
Amazing. I love that. So, what plans and goals do you have for the next years?
So my goal is to grow my business. I'm got 2 or 3 clients now. I would love to just scale my consultancy. But last summer I started something called the Catalytic Collective as well. And that is focused on C-suite or very senior level executive women in life sciences and biotech specifically who have an interest in going through the journey that I just went through. And that is after 20 plus years of professional experience and, having raised your kids and you're looking at an empty nest or you're in an empty nest, really wanting to self-curate your next chapter. So, creating a space for other women like myself to come together and to do that together. And so, one of my goals continues to be to grow the Catalytic Collective and to grow the number of women that come together. We come together virtually, we come together over mastermind dinners, we come together outside of biotech conferences and things. But it's about creating a safe space to explore, redefine success, look at freedom in a different way, and to have that true peer-to-peer connection in those rooms so we can safely help one another kind of architect our next chapters.
Amazing, Sonia. You know a lot about mentoring and advocating for others. What do you feel are the sort of most important notions that you bring to the table that you feel are really important?
I think the most important part of a mentoring relationship is making sure that it is mutually beneficial.
Mm,
I think that a lot of young folks are told, go find a mentor. And so, they'll go and they'll say, would you be my mentor? And they won't come with some sense for and here's how I'm going to contribute to the relationship.
mm,
I think it is that much more valuable and powerful when you're very intentional about how you approach your mentor, your potential mentor. Um, and then, as the mentor, I think there's so much value in intergenerational relationships. I think having people in your life professionally and personally that are, say, 20 years younger than you and 20 years older than you it's such an interesting and extraordinary thing. And bringing that to professional mentorship, I think is one way to just expand and expose folks that are younger than you or even older than you to your life experiences so that they can apply the lessons, but you're doing it together. So I think the mentoring relationship really should be something that is mutually beneficial and not one-sided.
mm. Great advice. So, what takeaways would you like our listeners to have from your story if you had to sum it up?
I think, in summary, the takeaway that I would offer is that whatever stage of life or career that you're in, it's important to put yourself at the center. A lot of times, especially as women, we prioritize everybody but ourselves. But I think at every stage of life, if you can just stay aligned with, what your values are, what your non-negotiables are, and use that to inform the steps that you take. Be open to taking a circuitous path, a non-traditional path. You want to be able to look back on the various catalytic events in your life and see how they stitch together a story that really honors you, who you are, and where you want to be, and really just taking ownership of your path. I think that we are at a time when anybody can do that. Anybody can reinvent. Anybody can course correct. A willingness to do that if at the foundation is your happiness and honoring who you are and who you want to be, I think that path can be really exciting. It can be really fun, but it can also fulfill you. It can also pay your bills.
Yeah, amazing. Sonya, I'm so grateful for your story and your insights, for your circuitous career progression, showing that it doesn't have to be linear, and often it isn't linear, and showing that women and moms can adjust and pivot through the different life phases and come out in that sort of third life stage post children, and showing that that brings so much freedom and purpose and fun and joy, and that it doesn't even really feel like work. And thank you for being an amazing mentor.
Thank you, Stephanie. I enjoyed the conversation.